On October 13, 2025, a high-performance TBM700 took off from New Bedford, headed for Wisconsin. Just a few minutes later, its wreckage was scattered across Interstate 195 in Dartmouth, Massachusetts. The pilot was an experienced volunteer who'd flown countless charity missions. So why did he turn back almost immediately after departure in the middle of a strengthening nor'easter? And what happened in those final moments before the airplane dropped out of the clouds and into a busy highway? Prelim report is out now. Let's walk through to see if we can find the answers. But first, when we talk about aviation accidents, it's easy to focus on the machine and forget the people. Behind the registration number, November 111 Romeo Foxtrot, were Tom and Agatha Perkins of Middletown, Rhode Island. Tom was 68, Agatha 66. Together, they were pillars in their community, known for quiet generosity and volunteer work that reached far beyond their town. Tom wasn't just a weekend pilot. He flew dozens of charity missions with Angel Flight Northeast and the Air Charity Network, carrying patients and their families to hospitals across New England. He was the kind of pilot others trusted, steady, methodical calm under pressure. Agatha was usually by his side, a steady presence in the right seat, sharing his love of aviation. On this day, they were headed west on a personal trip from New Bedford to Kenosha, Wisconsin, not on a charity flight, but just the two of them traveling for the sheer freedom of flight. What happened next is not a story of recklessness or showmanship. It's a reminder that even the most experienced pilots can be caught off guard when conditions and circumstances align in the worst possible way. Let's set the scene. It's October 13th on the Massachusetts coast, and the season's first nor'easter is moving through. At New Bedford Regional Airport, winds are from the northeast around 18 knots, gusting past 30. Visibility is barely 2.5 miles, and the ceiling is broken around 900 feet. In plain English, that's solid IFR weather. You're in the clouds within seconds of rotation with almost no visual horizon. That doesn't make it illegal to fly far from it, but it demands focus and skill. Low ceilings mean you have very little vertical room to recover from any issue after takeoff, and gusty winds mean the airplane can pitch or roll unexpectedly right when you need stability most. Now let's talk about the airplane itself. The Socata TBM700 is a high-performance turboprop, a pressurized single-engine aircraft powered by a Pratt & Whitney PT6. It cruises at over 300 knots and can climb at rates that leave smaller planes far behind. But speed and efficiency come with a cost: higher wing loading, higher stall speeds, and less forgiveness close to the ground. It's why many pilots call the TBM the sports car of single engines. It's fast, but you need to be ahead of it all the time. And because this was a Part 91 personal flight, the decision to go was entirely the pilot's. There's no dispatch office saying, "Wait it out." No company policy to pause for weather. For better or worse, the call to depart rests on one person's judgment. Many pilots looking back at this weather might ask themselves, would I have gone? Some say they would have stayed on the ground that morning. At about 8:05 a.m., November 111 Romeo Foxtrot took off from runway 5 at New Bedford. Within minutes, the pilot radioed the tower he'd be returning to the airport. No distress call, no emergency declared, just a short, steady statement. The controller instructed him to enter a left downwind for runway 5. He acknowledged. Then the controller offered assistance. "Do you need any help?" The pilot replied that he did not. A moment later, the controller asked if he could fly the approach or wanted vectors. The pilot responded that he would descend and should be okay. About a minute later, the controller issued a low-altitude alert and passed along the current altimeter setting. The pilot acknowledged, and then all they heard was a brief, unintelligible sound before radio silence. From a pilot's seat, this moment is one of the hardest you can face single-pilot IFR in gusty conditions, low altitude, and some problem unfolding in real time. Your hands are busy flying, your eyes are switching between instruments, and your brain is trying to solve what's wrong while keeping the airplane upright. When he said, "I don't need assistance," it wasn't about ego. It was likely about bandwidth, keeping the radio quiet so he could focus on the task at hand. But as any pilot knows, in that split second between flying, navigating, and communicating, the workload can snowball faster than you realize. On radar, the TBM's track loops back toward the airport before disappearing about 3.5 miles southwest of the field. Moments later, witnesses on Interstate 195 look up to see a flash of silver and a burst of fire through the trees. From the moment radar contact was lost, just seconds passed before the first 911 calls came in. Drivers on Interstate 195 saw the TBM break through the clouds at a shallow angle, clipping treetops on the south side of the highway. Those tree strikes began roughly 50 feet above the ground, the first visible scars in what investigators later mapped as a 280-foot debris path. The airplane then crossed a wooded area, an off-ramp, and struck the westbound lanes of the interstate. One passing sedan was hit by debris. The driver miraculously survived with minor injuries. The TBM's fuselage skidded into the grassy median and came to rest between the eastbound and westbound lanes, still largely intact but engulfed in flames. Fire consumed much of both wings and the tail. Propeller blades were found along the wreckage trail, each twisted and scarred at the leading edge, a telltale sign the engine was still producing power when the airplane hit. Investigators found no evidence of pre-impact engine failure. From the ground, it was chaos, smoke, burning fuel, and wreckage scattered across lanes of rush-hour traffic. But in another sense, it was a miracle. 2 lives were lost that morning, but given the number of cars beneath the flight path, it could have been dozens more. To understand what might have unfolded in those last moments, let's talk about how a TBM700 behaves when things start to go wrong, and how easily a pilot can lose the edge in bad weather. The TBM700 isn't a small piston aircraft. It's a 300-knot pressurized turboprop with jet-like handling. The wing loading, the ratio of aircraft weight to wing area, is high, which gives it a smooth ride in turbulence at altitude, but also means it stalls at higher speeds and reacts faster to control inputs. In other words, when you pull or bank, the airplane responds immediately and with authority. At pattern altitude, that sensitivity can turn a small overcorrection into a dangerous attitude within seconds. Now imagine you're single pilot in IMC hand flying during a turnback. You're trying to descend through a 900-foot ceiling while configuring for landing, power flaps, gear, radio calls, and navigation, all competing for attention. In a TBM, those adjustments happen quickly. The nose-down trim used for climb must be reset, torque reduced, and speed managed precisely. Otherwise, airspeed can build rapidly. A few knots too fast or too slow, and the workload spikes. This is where cognitive saturation becomes the hidden enemy. Under pressure, the brain prioritizes the most immediate task, often flying the attitude indicator, and starts to drop secondary tasks like cross-checking instruments or monitoring altitude trends. Add turbulence or buffeting, and the pilot's mental picture of the airplane's position can drift from reality. That's when spatial disorientation can strike. When you can't see the horizon, your inner ear relies on acceleration cues, and they can be deceiving. Accelerating feels like pitching up. Banking feels like turning less than you really are. It's called the somatogravic illusion, and it can trick even instrument-rated pilots into subtle control inputs that worsen the situation. For example, if a pilot senses a climb while descending, he might instinctively push the nose forward, steepening the descent without realizing it. Combine that with a tight base to final turn in cloud, a strong crosswind, and gusts rocking the airplane, and it's easy to see how altitude can vanish in seconds. The TBM's high rate of descent and forward momentum leave little margin to recover once the aircraft dips below the tree line. Investigators will be asking, was the autopilot engaged? Many TBM pilots use it after takeoff to stabilize workload. But during a return, some prefer to hand fly to feel the airplane, a reasonable instinct, but one that raises workload drastically in IMC. If automation wasn't active, every gust trim change and configuration shift would have required manual correction. There's another possible factor, somatopsychic stress, the human tendency to underestimate how close you are to the ground when focused on instruments. At 3 nautical miles from the runway, descending at 1,000 feet per minute, that ground rush comes fast. A few seconds of distraction, an altitude call-out missed, a checklist skipped, can be enough to slip below the safe descent path. None of this is to assign cause. The preliminary data only tells us that the engine was producing power, the propeller was rotating, and there was no sign of fuel contamination or structural failure. But when you combine the physics of a fast, heavy, single-engine turboprop, the physiology of spatial disorientation, and the psychology of a pilot working alone in a storm, you get a picture of how unforgiving those final seconds can be. The NTSB and the Bureau of Inquiry and Analysis for Civil Aviation Safety, BEA, have both joined this investigation. Because the TBM is a French-built aircraft, data will be shared between U.S. and French agencies. Their preliminary report confirms what we've discussed: a short flight and early turnback impact with trees in the highway median and no immediate sign of power loss. Even though the TBM doesn't carry traditional crash-protected recorders, its digital avionics suite stores rich flight data, altitude, airspeed, pitch, roll, engine parameters, GPS position. Those units have been recovered and will be downloaded to reconstruct the final seconds of the flight. Investigators will also check whether the autopilot was engaged, whether any trim or control issues existed, and whether weather radar or icing data played a role. For pilots watching this, here's what matters. Be brutally honest about weather risk. IFR doesn't mean invincible. Coastal storms and gusty winds can turn small misjudgments into fatal outcomes. Rehearse priorities, aviate, navigate, communicate in that order. In IMC, fly the airplane first always. Use automation wisely. The TBM's autopilot is an incredible workload reducer, but it only helps if you engage it early and understand what it's doing. And finally, remember Tom and Agatha Perkins. Tom spent years using his airplane to help others flying patients, families, and supplies where they were needed most. His legacy isn't the crash, it's the compassion and professionalism he showed every time he took off to serve someone else. We owe it to them and to everyone who climbs into a cockpit to learn from what happened on that October morning, not to assign blame before the facts are known, but to fly more carefully, more humbly, and more prepared the next time we push the throttle forward into the clouds. Fly safe, my friends. I'll keep you updated when the NTSB releases the final report.